it's been a blessing. I feel like the Lord's blessed me with this platform, not only to share Him, but to hopefully be, it's actually also kind of a platform, like a ministry platform, because I've been involved with Fellowship of Christian Anglers, and we've done legacy nights and continue to still do that as well, where we share our testimony at church. There's several of us guys that get together at a local church where those tournaments are going on, and it's a dream come true.
You can take it to the bank.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, sports fans, children of all ages, we are back here on Take It to the Bank podcast. I have got the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. James Niggemeyer, the guy that's got the most interesting name of all of fishing, maybe in the entire world. And he's got some fame from it. Let's give him a big round of applause here.
Ben, thank you so much for having me.
That's our live studio audience that's in here on the soundboard that I've got. James, thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna get into the weeds a little bit on 2 or 3 different things, but the main focus of our podcast today is going to be talking about Texas in May. And who better to talk about Texas in May than a guy that lives there, from there, guides there, kind of the whole kit and caboodle, made your name and you're living in Texas for a long time. Talked about it at the Bassmaster Classic. You and I don't know each other very well. You know, we talked a time or two, but thank you so much for coming on.
Ben, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to just share some things about Texas fishing, and I always love talking fishing, so this would be fun.
It will be. It will be. Before we get into that, you've got the most interesting name in fishing, and you have gained a ton of social media followers. You know, I feel like because guys like John Christ and Justin Nunley and some more guys have posted, about your name, and you scroll through all your comments and they're hilarious. Like, some of them are slightly offensive, I know, but a lot of them are really freaking funny.
Yeah, there's been probably a huge increase in my social media following in the last year or so. And my last name it's from Germany. My dad was from Germany. And it's not very common. And my sister's done some different things to try to find the, kind of family tree or anyone else with it. And there's different variations of it, but none are spelled quite like mine. And it was funny. I had a guide client about 2 weeks ago say, "Hey, are you kin to a lady that works at such and such bank in Dallas?" And I said, "Not that I'm aware of, and he sent me over her contact information, and it was spelt just like mine. And I mean, it's not a very common name. I ran into,
for sure.
Yeah. I ran into a person at a campground during a Bassmaster Elite Series event on the Mississippi River. I think it was in Iowa. We had an Elite Series event. That was one that Kevin Short, I believe, went on to win that one. There was somebody else at the campground noticed my name on my boat and my truck, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, there's this so-and-so." And, so there's just a couple times in my life that I've actually, met anyone with the same last name. It's definitely unique for sure. But my mom, I'm going on a rant here, but my mom, she's from the Philippines, and she actually went with my dad to Germany. And when they were visiting there, she said that was back when they had phone books, and she just flipped through there, and she said there was quite a few Niggemeyers in the phone book in Germany. But there's been some people that have posted about it, comedic talents like John Christ. I'm a big fan of John Christ. He's great. And really that's kind of put the spotlight on me. It's kind of allowed me to be seen by people outside of the industry. That's really kind of blown up my social media following. And it's been interesting, to say the least, that, I've been recognized as somebody other than a fisherman. I'm a fisherman, but I'm a fisherman now. My last name what it is. And so I've been even at some Bass Pro gatherings where people just came just to meet me because they saw me, they've followed my progress through social media and so forth. So it's been interesting for sure.
No doubt, no doubt. And as I mentioned here, just a second ago, you and I don't know each other very well, but your reputation precedes you. I've been a bass head, a bass fan for, since the early 2000s. I'm only 38, I think. Yeah, I'm 30, 38, 37, something like that. And, you were one of the OGs on the Elite Series when it was the Elite 50s, right?
No, actually, the Elite Series started in 06 and I qualified in 06. So
Okay.
07, my first year, and I was there till 17. Yeah, till 2017. So I was there for, I want to say it was 11 years. Does that add up? But yeah, I was there. Yeah, during the period when Van Dam was just winning everything, just being able to be competing at a level like that for that period was something I look back on fondly, and it was a really amazing era.
Well, as I mentioned, you've got the reputation of the nicest guy in all of bass fishing, and in our short time together, that's certainly proved true. And just like we mentioned a second ago, really before we came on air here, you've been given this platform. Obviously you've got some fame because you've won over $1 million fishing, I think what, 800,000 or 900,000 in Bassmaster and 200,000 or 300,000 in MLF. And, you've kind of been given a platform because of that. But the fact that you can reach so many other people just because of your last name and spread positivity, and, you're a happy guy. I've never seen you, be mad at a weigh in, and I've watched you weigh in a lot of times, again, just because I'm a fan of the sport. So, anytime you can spread positivity and get to know people, bring people into the sport for any reason, no matter why that is, that's a great thing. And you're obviously a great poster boy for the sport.
Well, that's quite a compliment. I appreciate that, Ben. It's been a blessing. I feel like the Lord's blessed me with this platform, not only to share Him, but to hopefully be, it's actually also kind of a platform, like a ministry platform, because I've been involved with Fellowship of Christian Anglers, and we've done legacy nights and continue to still do that as well, where we share our testimony as a church. There's several of us guys that get together at a local church where those tournaments are going on, and it's a dream come true. I'm not saying it hadn't been some ups and downs and some rocky patches, because it definitely has, but I'm super blessed to be able to live out this dream and continue to. It's a lot of fun, and like I said, it has its hardships, but what doesn't?
Of course.
Yeah.
And that leads me into a question that I've been kind of pondering on asking some podcast guests, and I think you're a great one to really start with. I'm a very faithful guy. I kind of consider myself a quieter, faithful guy. I try to don't talk about it hardly as much as probably I should, but definitely a believer. And how does faith play into your tournament fishing?
Faith is something that necessarily, like, faith doesn't, I mean, it has its factor in my tournament fishing, but my fishing, the ability to do what I do and everything comes out of my faith. So the fishing is a small factor or segment within my faith and the journey that has been over the years. And really, the challenges that you have, both financially and just like anyone in any other walk of life, you're going to have ups and downs and different things like that. My wife, a few years ago, had breast cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And walking through that whole period was just, obviously, as anyone could imagine, was super, super trying. And at the end of the day, there's, I've had some periods like, well, I mean, the reason I'm not on the Elite Series today is because in 2017, I was the first man out, didn't requalify. So you start to question, Lord, where are you in this? And even in the challenges, he's there. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through these hardships, doesn't mean we're not going to go through these challenges, but that he is still good and he is still faithful. And at the end of the day, he's just, he loves us in a greater capacity than we could ever think or imagine. And knowing that I can put my trust in him and know that whether or not it's what I want, that he knows better or best for what I'm doing, and he promises to care for our needs. That doesn't mean we get everything we want, but he's going to take care of us. So I love that God is involved or interested in the smallest parts of our lives and even in the big ones too.
And you had mentioned that you had some negativity stuff, some people making fun of the name or whatever, that had a lot of followers, that brought a lot of people to you, but you're able to turn that from a negative thing that, I'm sure made you mad, or, you had to deal with some thoughts regarding that, but now you're able to share his word to a lot more people than you would have before that. So you've kind of taken something negative into something positive.
Absolutely. And that's, like I believe there's a scripture that says that the Lord will take, how's it go? That he will take, he'll make beauty from ashes. So there's some things that God is constantly restoring, and he's working for the good in your life to, he's going to use what the enemy meant for harm, and he's going to use it for good. That's another scripture verse. I don't have the address with me right now, but
it's okay.
It says in his word that he's going to take what the enemy meant for harm and use for good. And just continuing to believe that God is at work.
That's great. Well, let's dive into some fishing. That's why we're here. Tell me a little bit about your background in Texas. I'm assuming you're a Texas, excuse me. Assuming you're a Texas native and have lived there forever and really cut your teeth on those Texas fisheries.
Actually, I'm originally from California. Fished the Southern California area lakes. And in 2001, I had moved to the Lake Fork area. I was kind of a gypsy for a time there. And before I could finally find a spot to kind of call my own, or a place to lay my head, so to speak. Yeah, I originally just began fishing at a really early age out in California, fishing for trout and bluegill, whatever would bite. That was what my dad did. And I think around 17, there was a bass club nearby, and I got involved in that, and it just snowballed out of control, basically. And so in 2001, like I said, I moved out to the Lake Fork area so I could guide and be more close to the tournaments, because I wanted to fish the Central Division, and they had a Western Division when I left, and it was called the Invitationals. That's when they would do boat on boat draw. There was no co-angling. It was pro on pro, and that was the Wild West, brother. I mean, that was interesting, but I actually learned a lot, because you got to go half of the day in the other pros waters, and they had to talk about whose boat you were going to take, and you had to work through those challenges. But anyways, to answer your question, I'm originally from California, moved here in 01.
Well, let's get into that just a little bit, because that's something else, especially the younger guys, like that's so foreign. Like even to me, I fished like one or two BFLs that, were long on boaters or something. I didn't have a co-angler and, had to fish them, do the exact same thing there with a boater on boater draw. And it's looked at as such a negative, but that's how all professional tournaments used to be. I'm Charlie Ingram's son-in-law. He came in the late 70s, early 80s, right at the beginning of bass, when it was really blowing up with Ray Scott and that kind of thing. He moved over to FLW when it very first started in 98, 2000, somewhere in that neighborhood. But he's talked about boater on boater draws and how guys, had to get along there in the boat for both of them to do well. And a lot of times both of them did well. So talk a little bit about the boater on boater draw and how your strategy had to be a little bit different. And this was, you guys were standing on the front deck side by side. This is not like a co-angler and he had to be on the back of the boat and couldn't cast to the front, right?
Well, you had different scenarios, because you had some guys that were like, okay, for my half of the day, I get the front of the boat. You got to go to the back. And then for your half of the day, you get the front of the boat. Or you had some guys that were like, I don't care. Let's go toe to toe. So you had to work through that scenario too. And then sometimes if you couldn't work out whose boat you were going to take, you had to flip a coin. Flip a coin was everything. And then if it was morning, if you wanted to go to your morning stuff and he wanted to go to his morning stuff, well, you can only do it one way. So you flip a coin. So you had to work through those challenges. And then the mental thing, because I was a greenhorn deluxe, so it was 97 when Ray Scott took the Bassmaster Invitationals to the West Coast. And I was going to do everything I could to fish Bassmaster because it's something that obviously as a younger guy, I was like, man, I got to do this. I got to do this. And to my own detriment, going financially, I was just going to do it. And I did it. But so I was a greenhorn. Really, I shouldn't have been fishing pro tournaments at that time, but I thought I was ready. And I had a bit of success, but I wasn't mentally tough enough at that particular point. And you had to have a strong mental game because some of the guys were going to play a mental game on you. And that was a challenge. Yeah, they were going to, it was competition. They were going to try to work every angle to their benefit. And that's competition. That's kind of what you do. And so that was a challenge. And trying to figure out whether if a guy said, hey, at this time, we're going to go to your fish, if they were going to stay true to their word, and then if you were just going to have to try to wrestle it out of them. And so there was some of that too. Again, that's a mental challenge too, something you had to deal with. But you could go and learn because, it's funny. You spend 3 days of practice and you think, man, I've got this, and this, or maybe I've just got this. You think that's the only thing going. And then you get in the boat with somebody else and he's got something totally different going. And you're like, wow. And it totally exposed you to a different mindset, a different way to catch fish. And sometimes they'd just be around the corner from where you were, but they had a different pattern going or they were catching the fish a different way. So you learned faster, I thought, because you were just exposing yourself to so much more as opposed to, just being and today you have those kind of cliques in the fishing industry where 4 and 5 and 6 guys are teaming up so that they could expose themselves to what else is going on the lakes. And that was kind of what we were doing back then, whether or not that was the intended effect. But we just learned from everybody we got in the boat with. It was really interesting.
Give me your very best story that you've ever got from a boat on boat tournament like that.
Story. Okay. So this is an interesting one. So you're a pretty popular fisherman, or a fisherman that, still fishes pro now.
Okay, and we can name names on this thing, James. It's okay.
I'm not gonna do that. Anyways, he had the home court advantage. I wasn't going to try to strong arm him into doing things. And so when he said, hey, I got this stuff going, we're going down there. There's some spawners and there's just some fish and we'll catch fish. And I think we both had a limit pretty quick, but they didn't weigh very much. Now it was on the Delta and the tide was getting low. So we could visually see spawners. And we went into this little area and there was cut to the chase. There was a 3 and a 6 pounder on a bed. And we're both fishing it. Now you talk about toe to toe. We're both fishing it, but we're trying to be respectful too because we're not trying to throw right on top of each other. If a guy reels, then we flip right in. If a guy, we're just taking turns and stuff, and so you could tell that the male was getting fired up. He was starting to spin on it, and we're like, okay, he's going to bite pretty quick. And this guy that was with me said, he's like, let me just get the male. Let me just catch that male and let's just get her out of the way. And then we can have a chance at the female. And I didn't realize that it didn't mean that he was going to give me first shot at the female either, but he catches the 3 pounder, puts it in the live well. I pitch on that female and she's hot already. She smokes my bait. I set the hook, but she only had the tail, stripped it off. I went down to go get another bait. He flips right in there, 6 pounder. I mean, it was like, boom, like it was over. It's just like that. And I was like, what just happened? And so as kind of a newbie greenhorn, I wasn't really a newbie. Like I'd fished a decent amount, but not at that level with that kind of competition. And I just didn't see that coming. And it was kind of a unfortunate scenario for me because I could have caught that fish. It just didn't get the whole bait. But he stripped my bait off of there, and so he's got 2 for 9 pounds, and I've got nothing. You know what I mean? Of course, we both had small limits, like I was saying,
Right,
but that's
right.
happened.
That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Well, let's dive into Texas in May. I think Texas as a whole is probably the most diverse state. Number one, it's the biggest state, so of course it's got a lot of diversity. But you've got everything from, Highland Reservoir type stuff to lowland reservoir type things. You go look at Lake Austin or, all the way over to, Toledo Bend and Rayburn. We talked a lot about Toledo Bend and Rayburn when I had Todd Faircloth on earlier in the year, in March, and those fish were spawning, that kind of thing. So, as a whole, Texas is super diverse, and, especially you being so intimately familiar with Lake Fork where the elites are this week. Let's talk about the state as a whole, and then let's go into the month of May and what the month of May really means depending on where you're at in the state.
Yeah, the diversity of the state is amazing because you have those South Texas lakes like Amistad and Falcon, giant bass, super clear water on Amistad, but then you have stained water on Falcon. There's some similarities to where those lakes fish, but then you have OH Ivy, which is arguably producing some of the biggest bass in the country right now consistently. I mean, they're just popping them out. And there's a group of lakes around that OHIV area that are also producing some really big ones, or kind of that West Texas kind of section. Then you got Red, which, they have grass and timber and then Fork. And then, of course, you've got down there at the Sabine River, Orange, Texas, you have Tidal. And so, yeah, you have a lot of different ways to catch them, a lot of places. You also have Texoma, which they routinely catch 20-pound bags of smallmouth out of there. And you just have some clear water fisheries. You have some dirty water fish. You have grass. You have highland type impoundments, river run impoundments. And there's a lot of different a lot of ways to catch them in the state, and, species as well. Not known for its smallmouth, but there are some places throughout the country that have nice smallmouth. As far as like May, I feel like May is really kind of the transition month. You still have late April, May, you still have spawners, you still have fry garters, you have fish moving out on points where you can Carolina rig them and actually, square bill them or medium runner type crankbaits. So you have a lot of different things. Top water is really key producer this time of year, whether you're talking about walking baits or pop-ars or frogs and stuff like that. Yeah, that's, to me, I really like May because you do have fish that are kind of lingering in the area of the spawners, some that are just out. And what I mean by just out, like just, 3 to 8 feet of water and so forth. But you also have the shad spawn that's typically starting to kick up this time of year too. And that's a whole lot of fun.
That's my most favorite way of fishing is by far the shad spawn. Like, it happens very first thing. And a lot of times when it's going on and fish are on that, like if you don't have 20 pounds or whatever the lake has, if you don't have that by 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, you can't compete. There's nothing any more fun than shad spawn fishing.
It's so much fun to watch those. You'll have those shad, and sometimes they're throwing them up on the bank, or you'll just see the presence of shad, and you're just working your baits and just watch a fish just come up and slurp your swim jig or your buzz bait or bladed jig, whatever, just spinner bait. It's just, yeah, I agree. It's a lot of fun. And I love it when you have like a day like we have today where it's just overcast and here we are, it's 11 o'clock. So that shad spawn lasts longer and longer throughout the day. And I don't know that they're actually still spawning as much as they're just not vacating those shallows, and the presence of that bait up there is keeping those fish there. And you can continue to kind of utilize that to your advantage for sure.
Is, right now, across most of Texas, is the shad spawn probably the most productive thing that you can do, especially first thing in the morning?
Well, it's funny. Like I fished Fork a few days last week, and I noticed the presence of shad, but it didn't seem like it was going yet. Then I was over at Palestine, which is 30 minutes to my south, and there was definitely a shad spawn there, but I had a crappie trip. So we were fishing for crappie, and I noticed the shad.
You're getting an incoming call there.
I did. I swiped him. There we go. So yeah, you have shad around the bridge columns, and I'm sure the shads. I saw some guys running riprap banks and fishing water willow. So I was like, man, they're probably on a shad spawn over there. But I don't know. It should be happening any day, but we're also starting to go through a little bit of a cool spell. We have a lot of 70-degree days, which we had some 80s the week before last, and I think that warmer temperature is really what kicks it into high gear. I feel like with the cooler temperatures now, where it's not, I mean, it might be going now, but it seemed like it kind of held it off a little bit, at least on Lake Fork. But yeah, the shad spawn, then you've got the presence of a lot of brim. I've noticed that there's a lot of bluegill, a lot of brim up there in the shallows. And I don't know that they're necessarily up there to do their thing yet, but they're just up there. And they're maybe eating fry or eating eggs or whatever, even just little bait fish that are up there. But definitely the presence of little bluegill up there. There's just a lot of life in the shallows right now. And that's, looking at those places, say primary and secondary points, clay banks, water willow, vine, and any riprap or rock causeways or different things like that around bridges and stuff like that. That hard cover, that's where they want to definitely do that shad spawn thing.
So when you first start looking for a shad spawn, are you looking, is it a water temperature thing? Is it a time of year thing? Is it a full moon thing? Really, what do you look for to say, hey, I need to be out there very first thing right at daylight, and I need to be, searching for a shad spawn bite?
Well, normally when I notice like, okay, there's fewer and fewer and fewer bass on beds, then I'm like, okay, now's time to kind of switch focus. And I'm seeing more fry. Now I think I need to start looking at that. And that's just kind of as a general framework, because sometimes there'll be a bass on bed, but there already is a shad spawn going. But it's probably real high 60s, low 70s, kind of where that starts to really kick into gear. And the thing that I try to do is I'm going to try to drive around and look for birds immediately, whether it's the white egrets or the blue herons or any type of bird activity along banks. And then I'm one of the probably the best shad indicator baits that I know of is like a white 1/2 ounce double willow spinner bait. And I'm gonna just wind that around. And if I start feeling them ticking my blades and seeing fish follow my spinner bait, then I know it's on. They're definitely doing their thing. And then it's like sometimes you'll find that shad spawn's happening, but no bass. And so now you got to try to find an area where the two are colliding. And that's kind of the thing the scenario that I'm after is just looking for where those bass are taking advantage of those shad that are doing their thing that time of year.
Cause I love fishing the shad spawn so much. Like that's something I always try to go for this time of year. And I've run into that a lot. I recall a tournament that I fished on Lake Eufaula in Alabama. And first day of the tournament, it's like 9:00 and I didn't even know what was going on. And I roll around a point, some wind's beating in on it. I throw a spinner bait. My spinner bait's tick, 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 tick. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a shad spawn. So I go catch, 18 pounds like that after I figured out it was happening. And then I fished the rest of the day. Now, it's one of the only times I've ever seen shad spawn completely throughout a day. It was the most insane shad spawn I'd ever found.
Wow.
But I only found bass in one area. Can you explain or what do you look for to try to find? You just mentioned the bass are, the shad may be spawning in a lot of different areas, but a lot of bass aren't in those. That's something that I run into a lot. Tell me how you try to find the bass that are in the shad spawn, because shad spawn all over the lake. Any hard cover, any vegetation, they spawn on a lot of different things. And even though they're hitting your spinner bait, you may not be catching anything because there's none there. What do you look for to try to, zero in on where the bass are?
For the most part, it's just about, for me, covering water and trying to just find that spot where the bass are actually feeding on them. And sometimes you might spend the most of the morning and find a lot of places where the shad are actually doing their thing, but no bass. And it's kind of a weird scenario because you think you see all that shad and you're like, how are they not here? And that's something that I've always been blown away about with bass is like, they always seem to know where the shad are, but in this instance, they don't, or it's weird. But yeah, I'll just continue. I'll kind of take note of what those fish are spawning on, those shad are spawning on. And then I'll kind of look at the lake through that grid or framework of, okay, it's water willow, or okay, it's riprap or concrete abutments or whatever. Maybe it's
Marina docks. Marina docks, yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm going to just run around looking at as many of those as I can before it gets too late in the day. And hopefully find that area where the fish are really taking advantage of the shad spawn. But it's kind of like, I guess it's not unlike any other kind of a pattern. There's a lot of places that look like it should fit that mold, whether you're, flipping boat docks or skipping boat docks or frog and lily pads. The bass aren't everywhere. And that's just one of those scenarios. You just got to continue to sift through some water till you run into them.
And I've noticed that if I can find an area that shad are spawning close to spawning grounds, if you've been fishing on that same lake for a few days and you see a bunch of empty beds, on a big long point or something that's really shallow, sandy, that type deal. A lot of times if the water willow is on the bank at the, very end of that point, up close to the bank, or there's a marina just, to the mouth of that creek that you were catching those spawners. A lot of times that's the way to find them is look for that close to their spawning grounds.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought to mention that, but yeah, if man, over the last month, there's been a lot of spawners in these areas. And if you see some shad activity around there's probably a good chance that those fish are taking advantage of those shad in that scenario. Yeah, that's always a good thing to go look and check those areas.
This podcast is mainly for tournament fishing, and something that I've really noticed catching shad spawn fish is these things are immediately post spawn. They have stayed on a bed for, the last week, 2 weeks, ever how long they've been on bed. I personally feel like they go multiple times just to spread their spawn out so they all don't go at once and, something crazy. I think that nature causes that. But those fish die really easily this time of year. The water's usually up in the 70s. They're super, super easy to kill. Talk a little bit about your fish care when you're catching those shad spawn fish, because you've got this 6-pounder that you've caught shad spawning that was a 9-pounder 2 weeks ago because she's completely spawned out, and they're fragile. Let's talk a little bit about fish care and how to keep those fish alive from 7:30 in the morning till 3:00 when you weigh in.
Man, that's a great point. Yeah, a lot of times you'll notice when you're catching them during a shad spawn, fins are all frayed and everything, and they've got maybe some spots that are, some welts on their body, and they're just looking a little fragile. And the first thing that I'll try to do is I'm going to put some live well additive. I like that G juice, that TH Marine G. That seems to really do wonders. And then if I think a fish is like, I'll use the TH Marine clips, the Cullen clips, and they're not a puncture clip. They're just a clip that goes right on their lower lip. If I notice the fish is looking a little bit, weak, then I'll just take that clip off. I'll just I don't want him to be fighting against another thing, wearing his energy out, trying to contend with whatever this item is that's in the water and is pulling on him or whatever. And that sometimes they'll get wrapped up. And so, but I try to make it as comfortable in there as possible. I might even try to put some ice in the boat and have ice. I'm not a guy that puts a ton of ice in the water, but I'll run my live wells on auto and then make sure that they're, like if the water level drops at all because you're running from spot to spot, I'll bring it right back up. Make sure the water's always looking pretty clean. And that's kind of the secret sauce for me. Try not to handle them too much. Of course, if you're culling and you got to put them on a culling beam, so, you're just trying to work through those scenarios. I definitely, as much as possible, I'm not trying to lay them on the bottom of the boat or in the car on the carpet and different things like that. I'm trying to keep them over the live well and do my culling. And I usually use a beam, but then sometimes I'll go to a scale if it's real close. I've noticed that sometimes the scale will actually show a little bit of a difference, especially if it's in digital. But yeah, it's super important, obviously taking care of the resource and just handling them the best you can and making sure that they're as comfortable in that live well as possible.
Let's say we're on Lake Fork. That's your home lake. That's where you fish, tremendous amount. And that's what we're talking about this week, especially with the elites are going to be there. A lot of eyes are going to be on that lake. And it's a famed fishery. It's probably the most famous big fish fishery, arguably in the world. We've shad spawned in the morning. We've caught a few. What are some other patterns? And here, after we talk about these patterns, we'll go to some maps and really dive into it a little bit deeper. But let's talk about some other patterns that are going, this time of year in the first or second week of May.
Yeah. I fished there a few days last week, and I've noticed that a frog bite was going throughout the day. Bright, sunny, very little wind in the pockets. You can fish a poppin' style frog. I've been fishing that copper red baits. I've got one over here. It's called a loudmouth. This guy right here. And it's one called purple shad. I don't have it here, but been fishing that frog in and around any kind of shallow cover. And sometimes there's not a whole lot. They're just working through areas and shade lines, any type of brush, the water willow, vine, pads, etc. Just working that, and then a swim jig. I've been using the Brush Panda swim jig, the Buckeye swim jig, and just kind of working it with the little Yamamoto Yamakra, and just swimming it through, just covering a lot of water. I'm not getting just a ton of bites, but working through areas, and we'll catch one here, two there, kind of thing like that. And there's some really nice quality fish too. So that's kind of a pattern that's kind of going, and that'll probably go on for another month, or it might go longer, but bluegill colored stuff is what I wanted to say. Hadn't been really getting out early to see, I've seen some shad presence in some areas, but like not really the true shad spawn that I would think. And so I've been focusing on, more of your bluegill patterns. And then, just chatterbait style lures, just fishing your chatterbaits in and around those same areas. We've got quite a bit of grass in the lake than we have in recent years. It's kind of that, I think it's called like North American pondweed or pondweed. Some guy
kind of spiny, has leaves on it that come out. A lot of times it'll top out.
Yeah. Yes. And some people will call it coontail, but I don't think it's really. I mean, there is a little bit of coontail. There's a very little bit of hydrilla, but there's a lot of that. There's a fair amount of that in several areas of the lake. So, fishing a crankbait in and around that, fishing that bladed jig in and around that. And then I've also been pitching timber. So pole timber, some of the old pole timber that's broken off, and fishing that on primary and secondary points and cuts. So those fish that are pulling out, I feel like there's fish it's two things. There's fish that are pulling out that are post-spawn, and there's fish that are spawning on those main lake points on those, what you call those spider root wads that, all the soil's been washed out.
Like
the timbers, standing straight up like that, but they're spawning in and around the bottom of that. And I'm fishing a jig or a creature bait in and around those areas too. And with that, it seems like a lot of the things that are going on, they're kind of scattered. You might catch 2 or 3 on one point. You may not catch any in the next 2, and then 2 or 3 more on the next point, and so forth. But those are kind of the things that I'm doing or have been doing. But I feel like there's got to be a really good squarebill bite right now, or even a medium runner type bite that's going to happen or happening right now. But there's also, I haven't thrown it, and I don't know why, but working your topwater type, your walk the dog type, Zara spook type baits, and then also your poppers. I've thrown the popper a little bit, caught some small ones, but man, I just love throwing a frog so much that if I'm going to throw something like that, I'm just going to reach for the frog. But
if you can put 2 big hooks in one with braid, why mess with treble hooks in a flimsy ash rod?
I mean, seriously, sometimes they want that little subtle bloop, but if I can get them to eat that frog, that's what I'm going to try to do. And those are some of the things that are really happening. I haven't done it yet, but usually as we work into May, a Carolina rig 3/4 ounce with a creature style bait, like a baby brush hog type bait, Carolina rigged on your rocky or shell beds, secondary points, subtle, flat, long tapering points. That'll catch some fish too. Those are some of the things that I begin to do, and we'll probably do that through the month of May, because there's still going to be a lot of fish that are hanging shallow, and then there's going to be guys that can catch them out. That I generally, if you got the cover and you got the watercolor, I'm going to stay there as long as I can. But generally, the deep diving crankbite, I should say medium to deeper diving crankbite, can happen as early as the second week of April, third week of April, and just go through the summer. It just depends. I feel like we've had so many cold fronts, we've had so much rain and different things like that. It's kind of pushed the spawn back, and push the spawn back. I think there's going to be some guys that are going to catch some good bags or some really good fish on beds still yet. But those are some of the things that are happening now. And I think they'll continue. Guys will probably catch some on big glide baits and line through type swim baits. It didn't seem, it hasn't. So I was part of a big group trip last week, and there was several of us guides on this big company trip. Nobody was really doing that. And some of the guys are real keen on that bite. Seemed like it hasn't been happening, but that doesn't mean that with the shad spawn that doesn't ignite that bite. So the beautiful thing and the sad thing about Lake Fork is I love to call it the every day's a new day lake. So just about the time you think you got it figured out, you better keep an open mind or it's going to come and bite you. So, you want to be open-minded about your approach and be open to opportunities as they present themselves to you out there on the water. Man, that goes for anywhere.
You're right. What do you consider your main fishing strength? Are you a shallow water guy, it sounds like? Or, I mean, obviously you've done this around the country for 30 years, 20 years. You can do it all. But if you've got one thing that, like, it's hard to beat James Niggemeyer doing this, what is that?
I love to fish flipping and pitching. And if I can do it with braid, even better, jigs or soft plastics, and even punching. I love to sight fish. I've had, a great deal of success sight fishing and doing that around the country. But shallow power is definitely, there was a period that I was on the Elite Series where, kind of in the ebb and flow of things as they progressed through my time there on the Elite Series, where I was on a downturn, and I went back and just looked at all my tournaments. And there was a common denominator, and that was when I did well or had a high finish, it was generally shallow power fishing type techniques. And it's kind of funny because coming from Southern California, I learned to drop shot before I remember we made our own drop shots. We took the tiniest little barrel swivel we could find and we crimped a split shot on it. And so we could tie our line to it. That was before there was even a line clip. I remember the first time I saw a line clip. But, there was something that the late, great Aaron Martin showed me, drop shotting out there on the West Coast. And so I did all that. I did the split shot rig, darter head fishing, all your 4 and 6, 4 and 5. 5 was a real key line diameter for us out west. So I did all that and fished them deep and did a lot of that type of fishing. But I don't know if it's just the way that God wired me. I just love shallow power fishing, whether it's squarebills or bladed jigs or frogs or those types of things, flipping and pitching. That's kind of where I'm in my happy place.
So you're going to start up shallow, obviously. You're looking for, that frog bite, the bladed jig bite, swim jig, flipping, pitching, that kind of thing. When will you start looking offshore, spending a bunch of time idling, looking at your graphs, looking for schools? Just when you go up there and 2 or 3 days in a row, you just can't get bit shallow? Is that when you start looking offshore, or is there other signs that you start looking for to start looking for those, schools of fish that are off the bank and 15 to 20 feet of water?
Well, it really depends on how the fishery's laid out. If you're on a fishery that is laid out and placed to that type of strength where I can conceivably fish 12 months of the year in that body of water, fishing shallow, then I probably won't ever, especially in a tournament situation where lakes I'm less familiar with. But if I'm here on my home lake on Lake Fork, I'm probably going to start looking out late May, June, because that's when I feel like they kind of are starting to group up. I feel like prior to that, you might run into a good couple of fish, or you might hit them hard one day, but I don't know that you can consistently get them day after day without it getting a little bit later, a little bit warmer. And there's so much going on right now, shallow, that I would wait till it gets later. Now, I'll say that, and Pollinick will probably smack in here fishing some, offshore ledge or something like that. But it's not to say that it won't happen. It's just, I feel like whenever I can do whatever I'm most comfortable with or whatever I have the most confidence in, I'm going to fish it. I'm going to fish it well. And that's important for me when I'm, especially in tournaments, but also if I'm taking my clients out, I want them to, to be out there experiencing the best that I have to offer. But but I've done that and I do that during the summer months, fishing offshore with football jigs and big 10-inch worms and Carolina rigs and even the big spoons. So we'll do all those types of things when I have to, but generally in tournaments, I'm going to try and as much as possible, try to find something that fits my strong suits and try to ride that out as best I can. Because I also recognize that it may not be the thing to win, but if I can piece something together and have a good, good strong finish or not have a bad finish and get out of there and take my lumps and go on, move on to the next one, then that's what I'm going to try to do.
Well, let's pull up a lake map of Lake Fork and let's talk about some good areas and some good places to start. You've already mentioned shad spawn, and that's going to be primarily around hardcover, water willow, riprap banks, concrete, boat docks, marinas, that kind of thing. Those are pretty easy to find. Google Maps or a really quick ride around to the lake, you can find that thing pretty quickly. Let's talk about your shallow fishing and really what you're looking for. Now, I'm on Lake Fork here. It's, kind of looks like a Y there. And we're going to zoom in just a little bit, maybe in this creek. What's the name of this creek here? This large one that runs, off of the west arm, goes north and south.
Birch Creek.
Birch Creek.
Probably one of the more noted or community type holes that are on the lake or is on the lake and produces a lot of fish. It's a great place.
Okay. Let's look at it. Let me scroll this back down here. Shoot. Okay. When we're looking at Birch Creek and it's a month of May, are you looking at starting out here at the mouth or are you starting all the way back here in the back? Really, where do you want to start within this creek? This is a massive tributary. Where are you looking to start first, James?
The thing that I like about Birch is it generally has a fair amount of color. And it's not your clearest water in the lake. Of course, it's at a major tributary at the very north end of the lake where a lot of the water will come in, and it has a decent amount of vegetation, whether it's that pondweed or hyacinth or water willow, and probably in the back, or it has in the past had in the very back, some pads. So it really lends itself to more of a shallow bite. But that also has boat docks. So you have a fair number, and it has pole timber. But you have a variety of areas. Some of the pockets, kind of, I guess you can't see where I'm pointing to, but some of those areas, you see that power line that comes across right there.
Yes.
Yeah, just down at the bottom of the power line that comes across. From there back, that shallow fishing is probably at some of its best. Moving back. Now, it's pretty treacherous to navigate in a lot of instances. After about a quarter mile past that power line, you're probably just idling the rest of the way. That's just that whole creek and some of the pockets on either side. I'll bounce in and around those pockets and some of the secondary points in that creek. And really, again, just cover water, looking for those areas that have more activity. And that's one of the things that's interesting about Lake Fork. Over the years, it used to really lend itself to being more of a pattern type fishery. And there are times when you could kind of get on that pattern, but a lot of times now, it seems like over the years, it's turned in more of a spot specific. So you might actually get on a good swim jig bite, but you may run a ton of water and just notice that there's only two real key areas in all of Birch Creek where you can actually even implement that tactic. After that, it just seems like you can't even get a bite on it. So, and you could really rifle through some of the areas that continually look just primo for what that should be like and how that should operate. Just very specific locations there will actually produce. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't pattern as well as it used to. It becomes more spot specific as you move
That probably has to do with fishing pressure. I mean, this lake gets more fishing pressure than arguably anywhere in the country.
It gets an insane amount of fishing pressure. You're 80 miles from Dallas. You're 4 hours from Tulsa, 4 hours from Houston, 80 miles from, or 100 miles from Shreveport, Louisiana. And and it seems like every fifth house has a bass boat. It's not, but it seems like it. There's just, it's bass fishing is king in Texas. And as far as things to do in the outdoors and next deer hunting after September. But I mean, it does get a lot of pressure, and the fish do wise up fast.
Let's talk about your secondary points there. We're right here in between these power lines. Looks like Lynn Branch and Briar Branch are two of kind of the bigger creeks here. There's another one just to the south here that's got a couple of different little branches in those. So if you're looking at in pockets now, you're talking about a main lake point. That's this area right here where the cursor is. It's a main creek point, I guess would be a little bit better there. You can, to me, you can take this creek and break it down almost like a lake. It'll be slightly clearer, I'm sure, I've never been on Fork. This is just, me using some historical data. It's going to be slightly clearer down here towards the end, towards the mouth of it, a little bit more stained back up here towards, the very back of it. And, you've got some main creek points here that are sticking out into the creek channel. Right here's one with looks like a little bluff bank or something there. Your secondary points that you mentioned, those are things that are points that are back inside these little pockets that are off this main creek channel. And those are the top points that you're looking at to really start on. So, something there, maybe in Briar, just across, to the east over here, there's another one. Here's a point that splits two pockets as well. Areas like that are really where you're going to start.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what really is a key too is, man, just playing that wind. If you got a south wind and it's going perpendicular straight into a point, those are some of the places that I'm gonna look at pretty quick, because I've noticed that there is a lot of shad in Birch right now, but a lot of it's not even, really right on the bank. But you get a good strong blow, 10 or so miles an hour, and it starts running into some of those areas like you've mentioned. Even some of those what you would call primary points within that creek, those are going to be great areas to, just to run a square bill or a bladed jig or even a spinner bait early in the morning. And then work through some of those areas. And another thing that works really well, something that you don't really see throughout the rest of the country, is fluke type baits like a Yamamoto D shad. Those baits like watermelon red colored or green pumpkin colored, or your shad colored baits, just fishing those in and around those same areas and lower and slower in the water column by letting them fall and letting that little tail shimmy to the bottom can be a great way to catch some less aggressive fish as well. It's kind of like fishing a Carolina rig bait with no weight, because you have a salt in those Yamamoto baits, but I'm just casting that around and fishing it low and slow and working it more subtly and slowly. I can definitely catch some of those fish as well. Now, another thing that you could also do is fish, your speed worm type stuff, like a Yamamoto Swim Senko or the Speed Senko as well. So you're just fishing those speed worms on a light Texas, casting them around and reeling them around that grass. And I'm not saying, necessarily on the bank. Sometimes there's clumps of grass off the bank in, say, 4 to 6 feet of water. They're topping out in about 2 to 4 feet of water under the surface. And so those areas will as well be something that I would want to look at as far as casting in and around there, fish are relating to them.
Are you looking for more flatter stuff or more steeper stuff this time of year typically?
Usually a lot of that in there is not very steep at all. In Birch, it's kind of slow tapering at the most. Some of it, when you get in and around some of the places where the old creek channel, either in the creeks or in the creeks proper or on that main, there'll be some more steeper type banks. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot of taper to much of Birch Creek.
Gotcha. When we start looking slightly offshore, the longer tapering points, is that something that you're going to look towards the south end of the lake down around, the dam within a couple of miles down there? Let's talk about some clear water areas and some techniques, down here closer to the dam. And what are you going to be looking for in this area here?
So absolutely. I feel like if you're going to fish offshore, you want to do that within either side of the dam or within 3 to 5 miles of the dam. There's a lot of different structural elements. As you get down towards the dam, the water's clearer. And I feel like those fish actually group up better down there. The further you go up north, I don't know if the population's just not as thick, but it seems like those fish don't group up. They become they're kind of by themselves or, one or twosies. So definitely at the mouth of what you would call Little Caney, which is that one creek, that small creek that intersects the two major arms. Just straight.
Yep,
there you
right
go.
here.
Yeah. So either side of those two main lake points, there's several little fingers in and around all of that to the right and to the east and then back. Yes, notice just right there, there's so many different little points and longer meandering points and shell beds. There's a lot of shell beds out there, harder type clay banks. And of course, over there too, like there's an area there called Little Boy. And these are places that are traditional areas where you're going to see a lot of boats. These are community areas, but like the Black Forest on Sam Rayburn, the reason why these are community areas because fish use them. And it feels like, I'm just kind of, sharing something that, no, everybody knows that, James. Well, yeah, they do, but I can't stress enough that the reason why places are good and community areas, this because there's bait that continually congregate around those areas. And obviously there's populations of fish. So just to name a couple, those two right there are definitely some places. And then around the mouth of Dale Creek, which is kind of to the west and south side of that. If you just move out it's this major creek, right to just up a little bit and to the left. Right there. That's Dale Creek.
I was about to talk about these humps right here look really good to me to look for some offshore stuff.
Yeah, you're talking shad spawn stuff right here. And then the gizzard shad, once you move a little bit later, you can catch some big fish on walk the dog type baits, Zara spook type baits and buzz baits and different things like that. And some of those same offshore humps. And of course, what you have there is just a natural highway for everything from those creeks in the back of Dale proper out to the main lake. You have literally everything a bass would want within a mile. And not even a mile, really. I don't even know if the back of Dale's that long, but you've got a lot to offer there. And those areas, those creeks in and around that area, I bet you some of the guides would probably be like, why are you shining the light on this? I mean, again, these are areas that consistently produce, and they're community holes for a reason, because there's lots of bait, there's lots of cover, there's a lot to offer in the way of fishing offshore or going shallow. There's just a lot of variety in these types of areas. And if I'm not fishing up the lake, these are some of the areas I'm going to go to. And then there's a whole nother world on that east arm too. So there's a lot of places to fish on Fork, and it gets a lot of pressure, and we can spread out. And depending upon the wind, we might all congregate in some of the same areas, because usually in the springtime we get a lot of wind in East Texas.
It is Texas, and Texas, I've traveled down there pretty extensively through my last job, and the wind's always blowing in Texas. Let's talk a little bit about your setups. You'd mentioned quite a few baits there. Let's narrow it down to 5. If a guy's coming to Central Texas in the month of, in the month of May, you first started with a frog. A popping style frog sounds like it's kind of one of your go-tos. Talk a little bit about your setup there, rod, reel, line, and then let's kind of move through the speed worm, the Carolina rig, and your crankbait setup.
Yeah, for the fish and the frog, I definitely like. Wondering if I had one here. tie it up. It's a 7.3. It's a Phoenix 7.3. It's called their Feather. I was thinking it was the MBX. It's a 7.3. No, it is the MBX. It's the Ultra MBX 7.3, and it's an extra heavy. And I'm fishing it on 50-pound braid. And you might think extra heavy sounds overkill, but that rod blank has quite a bit of tip to it, which is great because I'll be able to walk that bait a little further and a little bit better with that tip. And I'll also be able to place it in very specific spots. But a 7.3, I like. Some guys will go longer rod. I like a little bit shorter because, again, I'm walking the dog with that frog and different things like that. And I'm fishing just about every rod I've got has this is the Bass Pro Shops Johnny Morris, a Platinum Signature Series reel, 8.3 to 1 or 6.8 to 1. Those are the two gear ratios that I really fish. And with that frog rod, I use the 8.3 to 1 because I love to. Sometimes they'll eat it shallow and just run straight at you. You got to pick up that line, or they can throw some slack in there. When it comes to other outfits that I would have that are versatile for like a bladed jig, I would use like a 7.1. I would use a 7.1 medium heavy, and that would be like either the Phoenix Feather or the Ultra MBX. And I would have 14 or 16 pound test, a fluorocarbon, gamma fluorocarbon on that, fishing it with, fishing that bladed jig or even the Speed Senko Texas rig. But a good like 7.1 is going to be great for a lot of different scenarios, even for just like casting out, a Texas rig or something like that. But when it comes to fishing a Carolina rig, I'm liking like a 7.3, again, like 7.3 medium heavy or heavy action rod for that. And I basically use gamma for everything. On the Carolina rig, I'm probably going to go throw 20 with a 16-pound leader on that, or 14-pound leader on that. But yeah, I use Phoenix rods and the Bass Pro Shops Johnny Morris Signature Series reels.
Now, your speed worm that you mentioned, to me, a speed worm really gets put in a Florida box a lot of times, or a grass fishing box. And it's good completely across the country. I had a friend draw out with a guy on Hartwell, I think a few years ago. And this dude was reeling speed worms over the laydowns in the very back of one of the major rivers there, and just waxed their hind end with a speed worm. Talk a little bit about that setup, line, weight, hook, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. The speed worm is a great search tool. But it also, if fish aren't really on, more of a hard bait type presentation like squarebills and bladed jigs and spinner baits and different things like that, I feel like the worm gives you the ability to present something horizontally in that nature when they're feeding on something that's moving across the water or in the water column or feeding up. That bait does great at that. It has almost no negative. It looks supernatural, and it has that wag of like a swim bait tail. I generally like to throw it on, say, a 1/4 ounce weight, 3/16 ounce, depending upon how deep. And I like to tick the cover with it. Throw it out there, let it go to the bottom or over top of the grass, and kind of reel it over and just kind of trace the contour. And around grass is just amazing. It doesn't matter if you're in Florida or New York. I love fishing that bait. And just fish it kind of like a spinner bait. I mean, I'll just throw it out and reel it back, but I like to fish it a little slower. And that wag of that tail definitely does a great job of getting the fish's attention. And, when it comes to colors, watermelon red, a green pumpkin blue, sometimes you might go to like a red bug and maybe a June bug if the water's off color, or if you have an overcast day or a dark day, I'll go with some darker colors as well.
I feel like people really get in the weeds on colors. And the more fishing that I do, and the more people that know what the hell they're talking about, like you, color is fairly simple. I feel like if color, you had to have pink flake or you had to have red flake every top 10, or you had to have one single bait, everybody in the top 10 or the top 15, when you see the pictures on Bassmaster's website or MLF's website or whatever, everybody be throwing the same thing. That's never the case. Maybe once or twice, everybody's deep cranking or something like that, but they're all throwing different baits typically with slightly different variations of colors. I feel like black and blue or some sort of dark hue, a black with a blue flake, June bug to me falls in that really dark hue. Then you need a green pumpkin. Pick your favorite: green pumpkin purple, green pumpkin blue, watermelon red. There's differences between green pumpkin and watermelons. The northern guys will fight you over that. But to me, especially in the southern fisheries, green pumpkin, watermelon, pick your favorite on what you normally get bit on. And then a white, something that mimics shad. And if you've got those three colors in everything that you own, you're going to catch them somehow.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think there's times when fish prefer a purple base, like a June bug or something like that, in that red bug hue, especially in the South. But for the most part, it's generally, like you said, your darker color, like a black and blue, a green pumpkin, watermelon, candy's a great one.
Everywhere in the country.
Yeah. So those types of colors just work fantastic at, just across the board, wherever you are. And we can go like watermelon gold, watermelon magic. You could go several different directions with it, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of it that's confidence. And so if you have a couple ones that you like and are confident in getting bid on, that'll definitely work.
Is there anything that makes you go to that? Cause a red bug or a, June bug, those more purple or redder hues to me work really good in the summertime. I mean, a morning dawn or robo worm works all the time. But when do you go to those pinks, reds, that type of deal?
Yeah, the only pink that I really use is a robo worm morning dawn. I take that back. I will use a floating style worm, pink around the spawn or a fluke around the spawn. That definitely, for whatever reason, does its deal. But as far as red bugs and June bugs, I definitely think it's something that in the summer is really a key time to throw them. But I've also caught fish with those types of colors if I'm fishing more of your tannic colors, your tannic water colors. And,
coffee or tea colored, more southern brackish type water.
Right. And then also if I'm fishing around off colored water, stained, seems like that June bug and that red bug I feel like it's just a little bit more of a bold silhouette, draws fish to it. And it's crazy. I've caught fish in the same colored water with a darker color in the morning. And then as the sun gets bright and high, I'm switching over to like a green pumpkin or watermelon red. And I don't know, it just seems like you're getting more bites on those brighter colors when they can see a little bit better. I mean, those I say brighter, I meant lighter colors when it's brighter. Yeah.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I feel like we've covered a lot of different bases there. We've talked about the shad spawn. Let's really quickly, you mentioned a square bill quite a bit. Let's talk about that setup and your favorite square bill, because to me, there's really, really good square bills, and then there's some kind of shitty square bills too. Let's talk about your favorite square bill.
There's definitely a lot of different square bills, and I've got one around here, but there's a couple of them. One that I really like is it's the Bill Lewis SB57. It's got a computer board lip on it. It's got a tighter wobble and really cool colors. It's got a honeycomb infrastructure on the inside, so it's more durable. But those are what I really like. And I like to fish it on a Phoenix M1, which I'm sure I've got one around here somewhere. So here's a Phoenix M1. And this is, 7.2 medium heavy. It's a different type of handle scenario. It's has that cork and then it kind of comes in here. But fishing my square bills on that 7.2 medium heavy, and some people are like, man, I'll really have to throw mine on, a composite or a glass. But you can do that. But this is just a carbon fiber, graphite rod. So I like that rod because it has a more parabolic action than you think about with, your carbon fibers or graphite type rods. And it gives the bait to the fish. But I like a shorter rod, the 7.2, so that if I'm coming up to a lay down stretch or something specific that I want to hit in the water, I can place it right there and be real accurate with my cast as well. So, and I fish it on 14-pound test gamma edge fluorocarbon gamma, or 16 or 14-pound test gamma edge. And then, of course, that same Johnny Morris Signature Series reel. Yeah, that's probably the way that I'm going to go. And then there's also a new square bill by Bill Lewis, and I'm looking at it right here, and I see it, and I'm just spaced the name. That's probably not good. And I want to say it's the 4x4. It's not the 4x4. Oh, this is terrible. Anyways, it's a great all around. It's the ATV. It's the ATV series, and they have a 1.0, 1.5, and a 2.5. So three different sizes. The thing that's amazing about that ATV, I'm probably going to reach for the SB57. I think it's a Mark Daniels Jr. design bait, but that ATV works really well at coming through cover. It's amazing. It's real buoyant, and it just comes through cover in a way that few square bills really come through cover. It just like wants to go in and around stuff. It's harder to hang up. It definitely is a good one.
Really quickly, right here before we close out, I've really enjoyed talking to you. We've made this one a long one, but it's full of really, really good info. Talk about standing timber. That is something that spins me out. It's something I'm not used to fishing. We don't have a lot of that here in Middle Tennessee, where I'm from and grew up fishing. I fished some lakes out west, and the different places that you go, there's a lot of standing timber. And when that stuff is everywhere, it spins me out. How do you break down standing timber, pretty quickly here in a minute or two? Tell me what are the keys when you're looking at standing timber?
Timber for me is quite simple. Standing timber is the cover on the structure. So I'm wanting to fish structure, whether it's a main lake point or a secondary point. And then when I have timber on it, that just sweetens it all up. But I'm going to be looking at what's the structural element here. And then, there's times when obviously those fish are gravitated towards that vertical cover like that. But I feel like they're most likely going to be related to that vertical cover with some sort of structural element, whether it's generally points, primary, secondary points. And then every now and again, it'll be that timber that's in a pocket, like a shallow slope, a shallow rounded bay or something like that. Whether it's the guts or in the bays or out on the points, that cover of the standing timber is what generally makes it, makes me go to those areas and fish that cover. And if I have standing timber that has limbs, all the better. But a lot of the stuff's been broken down and worn away here in East Texas. The limbs have fallen.
So it's more like a pole that just sticks up there.
Yeah, we have more pole timber here now. And timber's a love-hate deal for me because it's not very kind to a boat or a lower unit.
You touched on something right there that I try to touch on when we go to different places of the lake, because it's super important from a safety standpoint, and that's actually navigating. And these Texas fisheries, whether you're talking about Toledo or you're talking about Fork or O.H. Ivy or any of them, they're a little treacherous to navigate if you've never been there. Let's talk about quickly about driving your boat and how you try to navigate these areas if you've never been there.
Yeah, just about every lake around me, if you spun a bottle on a map, has timber in it. Around here in East Texas, they just went ahead and filled the lake, and all that timber was still there. And so there's some lakes have great boat lanes, boat roads. They're marked by those buoys, and it's pretty straightforward and simple. Once you get out of those boat lanes, it's definitely an idle only. Now there's different areas that you learn to run over the years, but now there's great outfits out there like boatlanes.com. You can get a chip. They can send you an electronic transfer to that's not right, but they can send you that information through your email, and then you could download it into your unit. And so you can see where the places are, where it's safer to run, and depending upon water levels, of course, too. So that adds a whole other dynamic of it to it as well. But those chips are invaluable because, if you bust a prop shaft or a $1,000 prop, it's just not a good scenario. And you could hurt yourself totally. So, or your equipment. And definitely so you have those boat lanes, and that's good. And I definitely adhere to those. or places that I've learned from other guides and friends and different things like that, as well as the chips.
So stay in the lane that if you buy those, stay in between the buoys, or you need to be idling is basically the biggest key there.
Yeah, I absolutely. I have people come talk to me all the time. They're like, man, where are you from? And I say, I'm from the Lake Fork area. And they say, I'm going there. I can't wait to go. Tell me about navigation. And I usually say, if you're on the buoy line, if you're on the boat road, so to speak, that's great. And as soon as you get off of it, just shut down and begin idling. And that's the best advice that I could give anybody. Just shut down. If you don't know where you're at, if you're not on a marked area, just shut down and idle.
Get home safe. That's the most important thing.
Yeah,
all right. Well, to wind us up here, I want James Niggemeyer's most embarrassing story that's ever happened on the water.
Ooh, most embarrassing. I don't know that I have any. I mean, if I was to sit here and waste your time and think about it for a while, I might have something. But I'll tell you what came to mind real quick. Was an Elite Series event on Lake Cayuga in New York. And I had an inflatable life jacket, and it was right about takeoff. And I think they were getting ready to call. It was like national anthem was over, and they're getting ready to start calling, the pros to go out 1, 2, 3 like that. And I was sitting there, and I leaned over my steering wheel, and the little pull thing for your inflatable went in between the steering wheel and then turned. So when I went to sit back in my seat, it just went poof. It scared the dog out of me, and everyone around me just started laughing. And that was definitely embarrassing, because I'm sitting there and it's kind of quiet. Nothing's really happening. And that, if you've never been around one of those to go off, they're loud. And
yes, will scare you to death.
Yeah, well, all of a sudden that thing just, and I'm up there around things all over your shoulders, and you're just kind of like looking around like that and feeling, about this big.
Right. That is awesome. That is.
And I was ticked off, because I was like, okay, now I got to find my life jacket here, another life jacket, because I'm not wearing this thing all day. And Todd Faircloth was right next to me, and he goes, come on, you got to think that's funny. So I think, we all kind of.
That is great.
Yeah.
That is great. Well, James, thank you so much for taking your time out. I've learned a lot about fishing Lake Fork and those other Texas fisheries. Guys, go follow James. He's got a million followers, post a lot of great content out there. If people are wanting a guide trip on Lake Fork, if they're traveling down there, Dallas on business or with family or whatever, and want to look you up, where's the best place to find you?
Just my website is jamesniggemeyer.com. And if for some reason, due to my schedule or tournaments or whatever, I can't take you out, I can direct you to somebody that I would recommend as well.
Awesome. Go check out his social media. You will laugh at the comments. I promise. It is it's a lot of fun. James, thank you so much. I've learned a ton here, and you can take that to the bank.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank.